The US military has thought up some seriously wild weaponry, but there are some insane weapons even they won't touch. From rocket-powered bullets to nukes storing live chickens, and even the bat bomb. Some military tech isn't just used for battle, it can also be designed to control violent crowds. But in 2002, the US Air Force and Department of Defense took things up a controversial notch by funding the active denial system. This wild piece of tech shoots high-frequency electromagnetic waves at crowds traveling at the speed of light and reaching distances of over 7 football fields. When these invisible waves hit, they unleash a wall of heat that penetrates the skin by about 1/64th of an inch. That might not sound like much, but trust me, it hurts.
Most described it as feeling like a hot oven or grill being opened up.
Imagine a group of people trying to break into a military base. Just point this system at them and boom, watch them scatter like they've seen a ghost. While this seems like some crazy sci-fi tech, it's faced its share of criticism. Non-lethal force is supposed to avoid long-term damage, and there's not much clarity on how safe these waves actually are. Some worry they could seriously mess with areas where a person's skin is thinner, like your eyelids. Indeed, despite the first prototype being deployed in Afghanistan in 2010, it was recalled just a few months later and has never been used again. Details are scarce on exactly why, but it might have something to do with potentially scorching people's eyeballs. That said, an updated version has since been developed, but it's only ever been demonstrated on military personnel and volunteers. This is one piece of tech the US just can't seem to justify in real military operations. Speaking of military operations, why not support the channel by playing the free online PvP strategy game Supremacy World War III. Compete with 99 other players in real-time combat, forge alliances, and declare war. Based on a potential World War III scenario, choose a real-life country or adopt the US state of your choice and do battle using over 100 modern weapon systems. Unlock new officers and strategically deploy them across the battlefield to use their unique upgrades and watch as your elite commanders become legends. Season 19, Fractured Domination is live, bringing high-stakes territory control, returning fan-favorite elite units, and new legendary officers that reshape both armored and aerial warfare. Capture critical control points, secure powerful resources, and dominate a world where diplomacy has collapsed. Enjoy cross-platform warfare on desktop and mobile to achieve total victory. Get an exclusive starter pack sporting the elite Railgun using this limited time offer valid for the next 30 days. Thanks Supremacy World War III for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to it. Imagine a satellite floating in space holding 20-foot-long tungsten rods which can be targeted and released, making a beeline straight for Earth. The rods, which are almost 3 times denser than steel, plummet towards Earth, gaining immense speed as they enter the atmosphere. By the time they crash into their target, they're hitting over 500 miles per hour. Upon impact, the kinetic explosion would be powerful enough to level cities and punch through hundreds of feet of Earth. No propulsion and no explosives required, just plain old gravity. This is the kinetic bombardment, a concept that captured everyone's imagination during the Cold War. Think of it as a nuclear bomb without the fallout. So why hasn't anyone built one yet? Well, first off, launching all that metal into space is crazy expensive. We're talking potentially $230 million per rod. And it also broke the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which bans weapons of mass destruction from being placed in space.
Thank God.
But the biggest reason of all is they might actually suck. Here's the kicker. A 2023 study found that a kinetic bombardment would have a seismic impact barely registering a 2.5 on the Richter scale. In other words, so weak that most people nearby wouldn't even notice. See, despite how fast the rods would be traveling, only a small fraction of that kinetic energy would be converted into seismic energy, the one responsible for earthquakes. Not exactly the city-destroying explosion promised. So does that mean the whole idea is a bust? Not exactly. The The researchers said an even bigger, heavier rod could increase the destructivity considerably, but heavier rods also mean even higher production and transportation costs. So don't expect to see any country launching these god rods anytime soon. The Cold War was a breeding ground for innovation in the world of weaponry. Some brilliant, some paltry. No, I mean poultry, like actual chickens. In the 1950s, with tension rising between the US and Soviet-backed countries, the UK was particularly nervous about what to do if the Russians started gobbling up land from their allies. So began Project Blue Peacock. The idea was to design a landmine like no other, one with a full-on nuclear bomb inside, and plant them at strategic points on UK soil. Their plan was that if the Soviets invaded and trod on said mine, it would trigger an 8-day countdown. So while the enemy was busy building bunkers and supply lines, suddenly, boom, a 10-kiloton explosion almost the size of the Hiroshima bomb would take out every enemy soldier in the area. Only there was one teeny problem. The Brits were worried the bomb might freeze in the winter cold, turning it into a dud and voiding the whole plan. So what was their genius solution? Put a chicken inside the bomb, of course. Or rather, multiple chickens.
Wait a minute, is this for real?
The idea was their body heat would keep the bomb operational even in cold seasons. Does that seem unsafe? Don't worry, they threw in some feed to keep the birds from pecking at the wires. Doesn't sound the most foolproof to me. Even so, the chickens themselves were nothing to do with the plan's eventual abandonment. Indeed, it progressed to the point where 2 prototypes were built. In the end, though, the Brits decided the potential fallout of exploding a huge nuclear bomb on their home turf wasn't worth all the hassle. And shockingly, no other nation picked the idea up after. But if you thought that was clucking nuts, strap in, cause it's not the only bird bombardment I've got for you. Back in World War II, the US Navy was looking for a way to take down the massive German Bismarck-class battleships and needed a more precise missile guidance system to do so. Enter Harvard professor Burris Frederick Skinner with a truly wild idea. What if pigeons could guide the missiles? Yep, pigeons. Sounds crazy, right? So crazy it just might work. Skinner got a $25,000 grant from the National Defense Research Committee and started training his feathered friends. The process was simple. Strap 3 trained pigeons into the nose of a missile with tiny screens in front of them. Each screen showed the target area and the birds were trained to peck at the target itself. Because the birds' beaks were attached with electrodes and the screens were made of a conductive material, whichever direction the birds pecked would send electrical signals to the bomb's wings and change the course of its flight. So if the target was central, the pigeons tapped the center of the screen and the missile went forward. If the target was left or right, they'd peck left or right, and the missile would change course respectively. Each bird was rigorously trained using operant conditioning, where certain actions are associated with a reward. In this case, tapping the target on the screens rewarded the pigeons with birdseed. But why use 3? Well, if one lost their eye on the ball or just messed up, the other 2 could pick up the slack outvoting any major screw-ups. And the pigeons were getting the hang of it too. These cockpit trios could reliably hit their targets after just a bit of training, completing multiple test runs by holding the missile on course. Pretty soon, they'd be the nation's top guns. But then, out of nowhere, the project was canceled on October 8, 1944. Why? Maybe they figured radar was a better investment than missile-guiding pigeons. Skinner, of course, wasn't thrilled. We can only imagine that after the war, he went on to use his bird brain genius to become the world's greatest supervillain. When gunpowder was first used in the 10th century, it revolutionized warfare. Now, we might be on the verge of an even bigger seismic shift. Why? Meet the Railgun. In simple terms, it's an electric-powered gun that uses a powerful electromagnetic field to launch projectiles with unimaginably insane speed and power. Where gunpowder-powered projectiles can fire to a respectable distance of 12 miles away, a railgun can launch something over 250 miles. And when we're talking about a projectile soaring 7 times faster than the speed of sound, it's safe to say these things hit hard. Because of the high speed, mass, and kinetic energy, the projectile wouldn't even need to contain explosives to inflict brutal damage. So it's no surprise that countries around the world are racing to master this tech. France and Germany are leading the European Defense Agency in developing their own railguns. Meanwhile, Japan spent over $50 million to make the super weapons feasible in the next decade. And in 2023, they conducted the world's first successful firing test from aboard a ship. So, what about the US? Back in 2007, the Navy boldly called it the next generation of naval guns and invested heavily in railgun technology. But after spending over $500 million over 15 years, they had little to show for it and eventually pulled the plug in 2021. Since then, there's been barely a peep about any new investments. Maybe one day they'll finally get this weapon back on track. Get it? Like rails? Let's move on. Let's say you see a fortified position in enemy territory and you want to turn it into a smokestack, but your massive artillery equipment can't get close enough. What do? You make a 24-barrel mobile rocket launching platform. At least that's what the Soviet Union did back in the 80s. The TOS-1 is made to blast stationary targets from close range, firing unguided missiles straight where you point them. No fancy maneuvers here, just pure firepower. And it doesn't hold back. Its thermobaric rockets suck in oxygen to create an intense fireball, delivering a shockwave that's far stronger than your average warhead. While they were first made more than 40 years ago, the TOS-1's seen the most use in Russia's war with Ukraine, where multiple models have been taken out of storage and onto the battlefield. So how come the US has stayed away from this weapon? Well, despite its devastating capability, it's got some serious setbacks. For one, those thermobaric rockets are super powerful, but ridiculously unpredictable. They explode by making an aerosol cloud that ignites, so anything that slows the gas's ability to spread can seriously weaken its explosive power. That means things as simple as rain and altitude can turn a direct hit into little more than a glorified firecracker. And since the TOS-1 has to get up close and personal with its target, it's easy pickings for the new generation of drones. Now, the US does have its own version of this, something called the M270. It's got half as many barrels as a TOS-1, but other than that, blows its Russian rival out of the water. The M270 can fire from farther away and launches standard warheads, which might not pack the punch of a thermobaric rocket, but are far more consistent. This doesn't necessarily mean the TOS-1's days are numbered. Upgrades to firepower and range could extend this weapon's lifespan. Still, it feels like sticking a powerful engine in an old antique. It might soon be time to take these launchers behind the wood chipper. In 2012, the US Army built a weapon so unbelievable, I first thought it was something out of a bad sci-fi movie. Why? Because it could fire laser-guided lightning bolts. Yep, you heard that right. This insane weapon can blast an ultra-high-powered laser using a colossal 50 billion watts. To put that into perspective, most large cities run on less. But here's the thing. They only fire the laser for 2/trillionths of a second. They don't need any more with a laser this powerful. Its electromagnetic field is strong enough to instantly rip electrons off of air molecules, creating plasma. Plasma conducts electricity way better than ordinary air, so by setting up the laser near a high voltage source, the electricity will shoot along the plasma and towards a target. Early tests showed promise, but the project was eventually abandoned around the mid-2010s, along with any mention of it in the CIA archives. Maybe it wasn't as reliable as they hoped, or maybe the electricity bill of running the equivalent of Las Vegas for a split second was burning too big a hole in their pockets. We'll never know. However, there are some people trying to resurrect this mind-blowing technology. In 2018, a team in Switzerland was using the same laser tech, but instead of directing lightning at things, they were trying to divert it away from sensitive areas like power grids and airports. By firing lasers away from these areas during thunderstorms, they can trigger lightning to strike the plasma instead and divert it by over 150 feet. Pretty impressive. And it's not just governments working on this. One guy went and DIY'd his own lightning cannon. Calling it the Lawrence Plasma Cannon, instead of a laser, he used a wire that he'd shoot 240,000 volts through, vaporizing it and creating the same stream of plasma. Then, just like the Army's version, he shot electricity through the plasma to hit the target. Impressive, right? I'd say don't try this at home, but considering you'd need 20,000 car batteries to make it happen, I'm not too worried. In 2019, researchers at the University of Southampton pulled off a wild experiment. They simulated the process that leads to the creation of a black hole. Sure, it was on a teeny scale, but the implications are huge. One day we might be able to build our own black hole and weaponize it. Black holes normally form when an old star collapses under its own weight, causing a massive explosion and leaving behind a dense, infinitely compressing core. They're insanely powerful, sucking in everything around them, including light. So having the power to unleash one on Earth would be a terrifying game changer in war. But don't worry, we're nowhere near making them yet. Or are we? In 2025, the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy revealed that the US currently had the ability to manipulate time and space. Now, unless they've built a TARDIS, there's one thing we know slows down time the closer you get to it: a black hole.
Black hole? Oh, don't worry.
Could we soon see troops lobbing grenades that rip a hole in reality as we know it? Probably not. Some suspect this bold statement was actually referencing breakthroughs in AI computing, or it's just plain old lying. Besides, even if we could replicate the steps to create a real black hole right now, it'd be so small and weak it wouldn't pose any threat. But what if we could harness the raw energy of a naturally occurring black hole instead? Picture this. Aliens from another galaxy have finally made contact and they're vicious. We go to war with them and spot a black hole near their home planet. We can hypothetically supercharge it by surrounding it with a massive mirror system and shining a light inside it. The light would become amplified by the black hole's rotational energy, then bounce to the mirror wall and be reflected back and forth, indefinitely amplifying in energy until the black hole gets so charged up it becomes unstable and explodes, destroying everything in its path. Equal parts awesome and terrifying. Luckily, the technology to create such a bomb is way out in the future. Let's just hope it is for aliens too. You might assume that war is a no-holds-barred free-for-all, but on paper at least, there are all kinds of rules countries have agreed to follow. Way back in 1899 at the first Hague Peace Conference, multiple countries including China, Germany, and France officially banned something called dum-dum rounds. No, they're not as fun as they sound. Imagine a regular bullet. It's designed to pass clearly through its target, right? Now take that bullet and file down the tip. This weakens it, splitting it into multiple pieces on impact, which expand outwards, causing much worse internal damage and making it nigh impossible to remove. Pretty brutal, right? Unsurprisingly, it was deemed inhumane, and while the US didn't agree to the ban in 1899, they did sign an agreement in 1907 to stop using projectiles designed to cause unnecessary suffering. To this day, dum-dums are outlawed for military use under international law. But this wasn't the first time countries banned certain bullets. Way back in 1675, France and Germany signed an agreement outlawing poison bullets, essentially shells packed with arsenic and sulfur that would explode on impact and release noxious fumes that would poison anyone who breathed them in. It's one of the earliest examples of chemical warfare. Much later, in 1997, the US and 86 other countries signed the Chemical Weapons Convention Treaty, which prohibits the production, stockpiling, and use of chemical weapons. The US finished destroying their pre-existing stockpiles in 2023. At least once in a while, everyone can agree on something. In the 1960s, during the height of the space race, the US government had a pretty wild thought. What if there was a shootout in space? Normal guns work by igniting gunpowder inside the bullet. The ensuing explosion then launches it out of the barrel. But in space, there's no oxygen to ignite and facilitate the explosion. So could a gun even work? From this strange question, the gyrojet was born. This unique pistol-fired, rocket-powered bullets filled with solid rocket fuel, which could safely ignite even in the vacuum of space, continuously blasting fire from tiny jet ports in the back. Unlike a traditional pistol, the gun had the hammer at the front, not the back, which meant the bullet was pushed backwards onto a firing pin when the trigger was pulled, igniting the rocket fuel inside. The barrel even had vents for combustion gases to vacate from when the round was triggered, meaning less recoil and a steadier shot. But the gun had some serious problems. For one, unlike a normal bullet which has its most power straight after leaving the gun, these gyrojets left at a slow speed. This is because rocket's terminal velocity is only achieved once all the rocket fuel is burned. This slow start meant that at around the 10 feet range, the bullets were largely useless, a range that ironically is ideal for any traditional pistol. On top of this, the weapon was unreliable and a lot of dud bullets just fell to the ground, which, in the heat of battle, isn't ideal. While prototype pistols and rifles were made, these space-ready weapons were such a disaster that they never saw combat. And here's the kicker. It turns out guns do work in space. Bullets carry their own oxidizing agents, so they fire just fine without external oxygen. So all that work? Totally unnecessary. Still, I can't help but imagine astronauts firing rocket bullets on the moon. It's just too cool. In July 2008, a global catastrophic risk conference revealed that one terrifying weapon had a 1 in 20 chance of wiping out all life on Earth by 2100. And no, it's not nukes or a deadly virus. Welcome to the terrifying world of nano-weapons. But first, you need to know about nanotech, the study and control of matter on a shockingly tiny scale down to a single nanometer. For context, a human hair is about 80,000 nanometers wide. Yeah, that's how small we're talking. And with this developing technology, there's the potential to make tiny nanobots capable of everything from destroying cancer cells to becoming devastating weapons. These microscopic machines could be used for all kinds of covert missions, from espionage to assassinations. Imagine sending a bunch of these up your enemy's nose and then hitting the self-destruct button. Nobody would ever know. Creepy, right? But there's an even darker, more nightmare-inducing possibility: self-replicating nanobots. This theory, called the Grey Goo Nightmare, details a doomsday scenario where nanobots capable of making exact copies of themselves would multiply out of control and eventually consume every organic thing on Earth, transforming it into more nanobots. If you think it sounds like science fiction, that's because it is, at the moment. But with the rise of AI and robotics technology across the globe, it's not unimaginable that in a few years we could see it become reality. That's a future I'm happy isn't here yet. In the 1990s, when the US Army decided to replace its outdated M16 and M4 rifles, German weapons maker Heckler & Koch saw a golden opportunity to create the ultimate rifle, the XM29. This beast had everything: a modern carbine system plus a 6-round grenade launcher that didn't just toss grenades, it launched cutting-edge ones that could go off at a specific pre-programmed distance. Picture an enemy hiding behind a tree. Well, instead of trying in vain to launch it directly behind, you could set the grenade to detonate right as it passes, hitting the person head-on. Oh, and it had a launcher-mounted sight featuring a computer-assisted scope, laser rangefinders, and thermal vision. If you could slap on an ultra silencer, you'd have the world's ultimate super rifle. But despite all that power, the XM29's production was cancelled in 2004. Why? Apparently it was just too big and bulky for the battlefield, and the fancy grenade launcher and scope made it too expensive to mass produce. So the project was scrapped. Moral of the story: if you try being a jack of all trades, you might become a master of none. What if we could harness the destructive power of an invisible material that's been around since the Big Bang? I'm talking about the elusive, unknowably powerful particles known as antimatter. See, everything in the universe is made up of matter, whether it's positively charged, negatively charged, or neutral. Antimatter is also charged, only in the opposite way to its matter counterpart. For example, a negatively charged electron has a positively charged antimatter counterpart called a positron. Oh, and if the two ever collide, they annihilate each other. Despite existing for over 15 billion years, there's surprisingly little antimatter around us, though this is changing. In 1995, scientists at the European Organization for Nuclear Research in Geneva created the first human-made antimatter using the Large Hadron Collider, and while they didn't produce much, it sets a precedent for potential future uses. And there are a lot. See, when matter and antimatter collide, they don't just destroy each other, they explode in a colossal burst of energy. Some think this could lead to a clean energy source for everything from powering cities to space travel. But what if we weaponized it instead? Less than a teaspoon of antimatter can unleash the same energy as a nuclear bomb. That's some serious firepower. But there's another idea. Although matter and antimatter particles do destroy each other when electrons meet their antiparticles, they actually combine for 150 nanoseconds first to create a positronium atom. Now on its own, one positronium atom can't do much and explodes almost immediately. However, by forcing loads of positronium atoms together at the same time, it's theoretically possible they'd combine to create a superatom, which would have so much energy it could power gamma-ray lasers 1,000,000 times stronger than anything we have today. We're talking Death Star level energy here. So how much antimatter have we made? Well, since the 90s, only 10 billionths of a gram. In other words, a whole lot less than a teaspoon. On top of that, making this stuff is pricey. To make enough for a decent explosion could cost around $1 trillion. Back in 2004, a U.S. Air Force official let it slip that they were spending millions researching antimatter for military use, but since then, nothing. Maybe they saw that $1 trillion price tag and figured this goose wasn't worth the gander. Rayguns. They're just science fiction, right? Well, we've actually had real laser weapons for way longer than you'd think. Meet the Personal Halting and Stimulation Response Rifle, or Phaser. Looking like something pulled right out of Halo, this non-lethal laser rifle was developed by the Air Force Research Laboratory in 2005. Firing invisible rays of light, it's designed to dazzle enemy targets with its disorienting beam. Say an unknown group of people is heading towards a military base. Rather than leaping to deadly force, just use one of these bad boys to blind them, neutralizing the threat long enough for you to go and arrest them. The only problem? Despite being non-lethal, it might actually be illegal. A decade earlier, the United Nations adopted a protocol banning blinding laser weapons, which the US agreed to in 1998. Only the Americans claim the phaser rifle doesn't break this rule because it doesn't cause permanent eye damage. Even so, it's a cataract's thin line between temporarily impaired vision and full-on blinding. Since being shown off 2 decades ago, we've heard nothing about this weapon, so maybe the concern was more warranted than they initially let on. Who knows though, we might see a refined model of the phaser real soon. Or I guess, not see it. Besides, there's a new laser on the block. In 2022, the first mobile high-energy laser was cleared for use in battle, also known as the Hell. Oh, because that's not ominous. Unlike the phaser, the Hell is vehicle-mounted and features 50-kilowatt lasers designed to torch drones and missiles right out of the sky. But despite their destructive capability, there's no laws on the books against firing one of these things at a person in battle. And if you did, well, it'd be nasty. I'm talking sudden, intense pain concentrated on one part of the body that could burn right through you. How is a non-lethal eye laser ban but the fiery death rays good to go? This one's a bit outside of my pay grade. As of this video, there have only been 2 nuclear warheads used in combat, but the super deadly M28 Davy Crockett nuclear weapons system very nearly pushed that number into double digits. Entering service in the early 60s, the Davy Crockett was the US Army's way of taking the destructive power of a nuke and converting it into the mother of all infantry weapons. Capable of firing a 76-pound M388 atomic bomb over a mile, this rifle system could be deployed anywhere in just a couple of minutes. Upon being launched, fins would pop out of the bomb, helping to stabilize its flight before detonating over its target. The power of these bombs is equivalent to 10 to 20 tons of TNT. While that's less than 1% the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, it'd still be more than enough to level multiple buildings. And that's before you consider the radiation that'd start raining down across the entire area. Besides, what it loses in firepower it more than makes up for in portability. Only needing a 3-man crew to operate, these bombs could be launched from a tripod on the back of a Jeep. Before long, Davy Crockett units were deployed across the world, including Germany, Guam, Hawaii, Okinawa, and South Korea. As the Cold War started to thaw, however, the Army started slowly pulling back these mini warheads, retiring the last of them in 1971. Now the only place you'll see these atomic busts is in museums across the country. At least, I hope that's the only place you'll see them. With so many out there, what are the odds one got lost in transit? As a kid, did you ever play with those air-zuka toys that blast a puff of air? Imagine that, but on a ridiculous scale. The German Army's wind cannon was a giant gun designed to fire compressed air at enemy planes and knock them out of the sky. Invented during the Second World War, they found that by mixing hydrogen and oxygen, they could create an explosive burst of water vapor and air that shot out like a bullet and snapped wooden boards from over 600 feet away. Not bad, but how did it handle an actual metal plane? After some successful tests on ground targets, they set it up on a bridge over the Elbe River, confident it would swat planes right out of the air. Except things didn't play out exactly how they'd hoped. It turns out trying to shoot an aircraft flying at hundreds of miles an hour thousands of feet in the air is much more difficult than hitting some wooden boards a few hundred feet away. Not to mention the power of the compressed air dissipated long before it could even hit a plane. After a disastrous trial run, they abandoned the wind cannon for good. But Germany isn't the only country to dabble in airburst weapons. In the 1970s, the US was developing a wind-generated machine for crowd control. Once again, it seems this research didn't go anywhere. Maybe they thought sending protesters 20 feet in the air wasn't the best form of de-escalation. An issue that comes up again and again in battle is the never-ending need for more raw material. I mean, cannons need cannonballs to do much of anything, so why has nobody considered using the raw limitless power of the sun? Well, funnily enough, they have. Far back at 212 BC, when Rome was at war with Syracuse, inventor Archimedes supposedly built an array of sun-concentrating copper mirrors. Legend has it that by pointing the mirrors at just the right angle, they'd reflect the sun's rays into one intense beam that could set enemy ships ablaze. Imagine that weird kid at school who used a magnifying glass to burn ants, but on an epic scale. Despite the apparent success of these mirrors, we wouldn't see anyone try to replicate the strategy until the Second World War. After Germany fell in 1945, the Allies uncovered a truly insane number of uncompleted weapons prototypes. But by far the wildest was the schematics for a huge space mirror spanning 3.5 square miles. Floating some 5,000 miles from the planet's surface, soldiers inside the dish would receive orders from back on Earth to rotate it into position using built-in rocket thrusters. The mirror's curvature would then focus a hyper-powerful ray of solar radiation down at enemy targets back on Earth. German scientists claimed the ray would be able to burn whole cities to the ground and even evaporate entire parts of the ocean, painting an incredibly apocalyptic vision. This is all pretty ambitious, especially when you remember that the first human object placed in orbit wasn't until more than a decade after the war. The plan was for astronauts to wear magnetic shoes to overcome weightlessness and to replenish their oxygen supply using an onboard pumpkin patch. Luckily, the project was abandoned after Germany lost the war. And despite collecting all that research, the US has never made any plans to launch its own Mirror of Death. Whether it's because it'd be shockingly expensive or because the idea of living off of pumpkin fumes sounds pretty rough, I'll let you decide. Picture 1,000,000 bats falling from the sky, landing in every nook and cranny of your town, then just when you least expect it, they all instantly explode into fireballs, igniting everything in their path. Sounds like a living nightmare, right? Well, at the height of World War II, it was very nearly real. In 1942, dentist by day and aspiring inventor by night, Little Adams pitched his bizarre idea of a bat bomb to the US Army. The plan was to strap incendiary bombs to over 1,000 bats, store them in a 5-foot-long tube, and fly them over Japan. Once released, the bats would scatter over villages before exploding in a sea of fire. Where the average incendiary runs done by air could produce around 400 ground fires, Little believed his invention could produce closer to 5,000. Though it sounds like something straight out of a mad scientist's diary, President Roosevelt saw potential and personally approved the project. Thousands of free-tailed bats were shipped from New Mexico to California for testing. But unsurprisingly, things didn't go smoothly. The first hurdle was figuring out how to keep the bats calm while they were being transported to the bombing destination. Their solution? Cooling the temperature of their containers to chill them into hibernation. The assumption was they'd spring to action when they were set free, ready to swoop down on any unsuspecting target. But when it came time for their first test, using non-flammable dummy bombs, most didn't wake up, instead falling straight to the ground. And the few that did wake up simply flew off in random directions. So, not a good start. But things got even worse. During another test, 6 bomb-loaded bats escaped and set the new Carlsbad Auxiliary Airfield in New Mexico on fire. On the bright side, it proved the concept worked. By December 1943, Little had worked out the bugs and set several successful fires. By mid-1944, the project was battle-ready. But then, another bomb stole the spotlight. See, while Little was perfecting his bat bombs, the first atomic bomb was being tested south of Los Alamos. The sheer power of these nukes made Little's project look like a morbid science fair experiment. The war came to an end in 1945 after Japan was hit by 2 atomic bombs. Meanwhile, Little's bat bombs never made it off the ground. Thanks again to Supremacy World War III. Don't forget to click the link in the description and get your exclusive starter pack with an elite railgun worth $40. But now we've reached the end of the video. Which of those insane weapons shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.